The Silence of the Lambs introduced the world to the character of Hannibal Lecter, played by Anthony Hopkins, and completely redefined the way that serial killers were portrayed on film, and is the only horror film ever to win Best Picture at the Oscars. In this video, I want to break down a few of my favorite scenes from The Silence of the Lambs, and also unpack the amazing but unsettling direction of director Jonathan Demme. So let's get into it. If you're new here, I'm Jordan, and welcome back to my channel. I'm a narrative writer, director, and producer, and have been working in LA for the last 10 years. This channel is all about filmmaking techniques, the philosophy of art, creative and technical workflows, and what filmmaking can teach us about life. I also want to discuss that brilliant misdirect that's one of the best uses of editing in film that I've ever seen and utilizes the cinematic medium to its full potential. So with that set up, let's dive in to the scenes. The screaming of the lambs. Now that Lecter is in the process of being transferred, Clarice actually makes the visit out to him where he's in this temporary holding cell that's in this almost museum-like space. And it's definitely interesting because now there's bars between them in a way that there was just glass before in his last cell. But she actually does take the courtesy to bring him his drawings that they took away from him as punishment.
I thought you might like your drawings back, Doctor.
And I definitely think this further establishes the relationship between Lecter and Clarice.
Or did Jack Crawford send you for one last wheedle before you're both booted off the case?
And I think there is a little bit of this off-kilter dynamic.
No, I came because I wanted to.
But it's very unsettling, and even Lecter points out,
People will say we're in love.
and I think deep down he's making that as a joke, but it still is that unsettling nature of that might be the way some people, maybe even audience members, might start to perceive it. But I like that there is a little bit of this elusive nature to their relationship that could potentially even be suggested that it's starting to grow fond of each other. I don't think fully in that way, but it just makes for an interesting dynamic on screen between them two. I want to comment on the blocking of this dialogue scene because it's a fascinating use of the new space and the new cell that Lecter is kept in. It's really smart that it's this big square that is made of bars, and I like that Clarice is essentially pacing back and forth between one side of the square, and then she'll round the corner and go to the other. And it's really smart because it keeps the blocking fresh and interesting, and it's a way to almost show she's pacing in her brain. She's going through all the different permutations of what could be happening with this case, stumbling upon no answers. She's having to rely on Lecter, and he's testing her. He's almost using the Socratic method, asking her questions. He's not giving her any easy answers.
And tell me how.
First principles, Clarice. Simplicity.
He's almost treating her like a pupil in this scene, which is interesting in that he's teaching her how to use her mind, how to use her skill set to its potential so that she can actually start to think for herself and find these clues on her own so that in the future she's going to be able to continue to do this.
Read Marcus Aurelius. Of each particular thing, ask, what is it in itself?
In this interesting way, he's helping her. He's trying to compel her to get better at her job.
What does he do, this man you seek?
He kills women.
And she's starting to sense the desperation and the ticking clock on the latest victim that he's caught.
What is the first and principal thing he does? What needs does he serve by killing?
But I think it's brilliant the way it's a simple back and forth. We're constantly still moving the camera from Clarice's point of view.
Anger. Social acceptance.
Of course, it's a testament to the camera operator for constantly having to land the frame within the bars so that we get a clean frame of each of their expressions, since I don't think it would be a great frame at all if we landed on the middle of a bar separating their face. So it's very much something where they have to land that camera between the bars so that we get a frame that still sells our performance moments. And then we bring the wider shots with the movement and the camera moving into now more static, back and forth. I really like that every time we have the same consistent rhythm of the camera language and the editing of whenever it's just Clarice and Lecter having these intense, intimate conversations. Whenever Lecter and Clarice finally lock into a conversation, it's always a very intimate one-on-one moment where the camera's not moving. It's just static close-ups that we're going back and forth between that are clean, and they feel like POV close-ups. And I really like that we just lock in on the same angle, and that's where we really learn our most pivotal information the whole film, which usually comes from Hannibal Lecter.
After your father's murder, you were orphaned. You were 10 years old. You went to live with cousins on a sheep and horse ranch in Montana.
when Clarice is questioning him and they're having this dialogue. And what's really nice about it is it starts to feel more like they're having a conversation among people who respect each other, almost even friends.
And one morning I just ran away.
Not just, Clarice. What set you off?
And not so much the typical line of questioning that would normally happen in a questioning room or with the light. And again, we're still seeing everything lit. We can see all things in the frame. It's not that standard style of detective questioning where there's a single spotlight and it's dark around the rest of the table. So I think this is such a brilliant way to really lock us in as the audience. So now we're back in the rhythm of it's just Clarice and it's just Lecter. And a lot of this film really almost feels like it's just these two, and all of the other extraneous elements happening in the plot are revolving around them two, and whatever's happening with their dynamic is what's driving everything else. So I think this editing rhythm and the camera language is such a pivotal way to show that in such a strong way. And again, there's no music here. The performances are just so compelling that we want to keep watching them. Hopkins is just riveting. He's using every instrument of his senses. I think one thing that's so great about the character of Hannibal Lecter is he's constantly employing senses. He's talking about memory. He smells her perfume early in the film. He talks about sights and sounds, especially when he talks about Clarice's past.
You started at what time?
Early, it's still dark.
Then something woke you, didn't it? Was it a dream? What was it?
So I think he's using all five senses in such a brilliant way that really enhance this performance and make us as the viewer also feel those same sensations.
What was it?
It was screaming.
What an absolutely brilliant scene. This is probably my favorite scene in the whole film. I love that we are still outside the bars for a large part of the beginning where they're establishing the rhythm, even once we lock into the locked off close-ups. And what is so amazing is we subtly move in on each angle to where we get to a point where we slowly push past the bars. So for each point of view that we start to see as the scene and the emotional intensity builds, we now move to a place where the bars are no longer confining us as the viewer, but we are now fully in the headspace with no obstructions of both Clarice and Hannibal Lecter.
I went downstairs, outside.
And this is such a great way to showcase just the emotional intensity, the stakes, and how we're really learning so much now about Clarice's past.
I crept up into the barn. I was so scared to look inside, but I had to.
Her trauma, her pathology, how she grew up, and really the driving reason why she went into the FBI and why she does what she does.
What did you see, Clarice? What did you see?
Lambs.
And we established the story of how she ran away from home after her dad passed away when she was 10, and she lived on a lamb farm where she would often hear the slaughtering of the lambs and the screaming, and just how incredibly disturbing it was to her.
They were screaming.
They were slaughtering the spring lambs?
And when she ran away, she attempted to save at least one lamb to feel like she at least made some impact, but even that one, she wasn't able to save.
First I tried to free them. I opened the gate to their pen, but they wouldn't run. They just stood there.
And I think that's the fitting metaphor of, in this job, being a detective, trying to catch killers and save people. Sometimes the unfortunate reality is you can only save so many. There's only so much you can do.
But you could, and you did, didn't you?
Yes.
You can't save the whole world.
I took one lamb and I ran away as fast as I could.
Where were you going, Clarice?
But that's what's driving her, and she'll never be able to fully rest until she feels like she saved every lamb or everyone or every victim, in this case for Buffalo Bill.
I thought if I could save just one, but he was so heavy.
And so I really love that this is where we get our title for the film, is they talk about the screaming of the lambs and how that still haunts her. And only once they're silent, the silence of the lambs means there's no longer any killing. Only then, once the silence of the lambs happens, will Clarice finally be fulfilled and at full inner peace.
What became of your lamb, Clarice?
I killed him.
Which we don't know if that'll ever happen, but I love that this is a fitting tie that really explains so much about who's Clarice, what's driving her, and why does she do what she does. And I think Lecter brings this out of her in such a poignant and emotional way.
Still wake up sometimes, don't you? You wake up in the dark. and hear the screaming of the lamb.
In a way that she probably wouldn't reveal to any of her other coworkers.
Yes.
So I think this is also where you start to see their relationship not only transcends the bounds of her professional working life at the FBI.
You think if you save poor Catherine, you could make them stop, don't you? You think if Catherine lives...
But it also transcends the bars of the prison cell, since they're only talking on the sides of something. There's always either a glass wall or a prison cell in front of them that separates them.
You won't wake up in the dark ever again to that awful screaming of the lambs.
And so there's very much this idea that Lecter speaks to early in the film, where he says how he would love to know her in private. And I think that camera move for me fully symbolizes, that's how I interpret that camera move once they move past the bars, is this is the closest Lecter will ever get to knowing Clarice in private, as she's finally opening up to him. He's getting her to, in an effort to give her information about the case that she desperately needs.
Tell me his name, Doctor.
And so they're helping each other get what they both need, the quid pro quo that they also talk about earlier in the film. And so I think this serves that idea, but also transcends the bars, that finally now they're connecting on a level that isn't with any barrier that's separating them in a physical space. And this is such a great way to metaphorically show that. So this is why I think this scene does so many things for us. And I really do believe that this monologue that Jodie Foster gives, where most of the scene, once we push past the bars, really stays on her face and her close-up as she recounts the screaming of the lambs and how much it disturbed her. I'm pretty sure this is probably one of the monologues, if not the monologue, that won her the Best Actress Oscar at the 1992 Oscars when she won Best Actress. So there you go. Performance, sometimes it's all in the subtlety. I also love that she doesn't necessarily cry here. We see her get emotional. We see a little bit of her eyes start to tear, but a lot of times I think in Oscar movies, there's this notion that an actor, actress has to have this movie defying moment where they have a lot of tears and they're crying and it's very emotional. And I just love that this whole performance is so much more about restraint and subtlety, because she's on the job, because she has to keep it together as a woman in the FBI so that she can do her job to its potential. So I think this is such a beautiful way that shows her exterior is slowly coming apart, but she also is able to regain it, still be professional. And especially when Chilton shows up, she has to put that exterior back on right away. Otherwise, she's not going to be able to do her job and find the last victim that Buffalo Bill currently has.
Dr. Chilton, I presume. I think you know each other.
Amazing scene all across the board. And then we move back wide again once Chilton shows up.
Let's go. It's your turn, Doctor.
One amazing thing too is that we only start to bring in the score very late into the scene, especially before Chilton shows up and we're about to leave our scene.
Tell me his name, Doctor.
So I think one of the great parts about the score throughout this film by Howard Shore is so much of the film is driven more by the performances and the moments, and especially when it's Clarice and Lecter locked in, they get rid of the score because that almost would impose on their relationship again as well. So it's almost like them two, the whole world stops, including the music, all other sounds, it's just them two. And then once other people enter the picture, the score starts to build only when we're starting to kind of exit our scene.
Sorry, ma'am, I've got orders. I had to put you on a plane. Come on now.
Brave Clarice.
And leave the space, and other people are starting to enter their space, if you will. Once all the other men enter the room with Chilton, I think it's also very fitting that she keeps asking him, what's the name? Give me a name. He still refuses, and I think it's because the other people are in the room.
It's your turn, Doctor.
Out.
Tell me his name.
Sorry.
I think if it was just her still, it's much more likely that he was about to reveal the name. And then when Chilton comes in, he says, I'm assuming you're familiar with Dr. Chilton. So you kind of wonder what would have happened if they had another moment together. Would he have actually revealed what he was supposed to? We'll never know.
Well, let me know when those lambs stop screaming, won't you?
Tell me his name, Doctor.
But that's what makes great drama. Ooh, and then he slides his hand over her when he grabs the case file.
Goodbye, Clarice.
It's just another moment to the intimacy that you can't help but be curious by. Of course, we have to speak briefly about how Lecter escapes in such a smart way. What's interesting structurally in this film is that Lecter escapes, and then for a whole nother 20 or 30 minutes of the film before we end, we almost forget about what happened to him. We still are so focused on Clarice's mission to save the last victim that Buffalo Bill has. And I think the reason for that is we're still telling the story from Clarice's point of view. And again, the way we shoot it, with the way that people are looking into the camera as if we're Clarice, there's so many decisions that support this idea. And so the way that I interpret it is that the reason we almost push Lecter to the side, we almost don't even think about what's happening with him, we almost forget about him because we're trying to focus on catching Buffalo Bill first and catching that one victim, the last lamb, if you will, for Clarice. I almost interpret it as it's Clarice's point of view that she's so hyper focused on just catching Buffalo Bill. That's the biggest task that has to happen right now. That's the most urgent task before he kills again, so that he doesn't keep killing these women or getting more of the lambs. This is not only a way for her to get closer to closure for her upbringing and her past, but also it's the most pressing issue in her mind right now. And I think it's, again, her compartmentalizing. So as the audience, we're compartmentalizing. We'll handle Lecter later into another moment when we can, but she almost knows he's not as much of a threat in the interim as Buffalo Bill is. And I think that's something that, again, feeds into their dynamic, in that maybe she has started to almost gain an ounce of trust for him because of how much he has helped her catch Buffalo Bill. And there's no way she would have been able to without Lecter's help. And there's this amazing Angel of Death type shot where Lecter is strewn up one of the cops and he's hanging there almost in an angel manner with the lights coming down over where he was in the cell. So I think it's just such an amazing pullout as the score really swells here. That's one of my favorite moments of the score, where it feels just pressing and urgent. I think Shore did such a good job of creating a score that feels emotionally engaging, but also very moving in a way that feels desperate in a way. I think that's the best way to describe it, is there's a desperation when we pull out and we see, uh-oh, Lecter's on the loose again.
Go!
The other thing I'll note that I caught in a more recent viewing is the fact that the way Lecter ends up fully escaping is he cut off the face of one of the officers and he put it on his, almost like Leatherface. And so I don't know if there's any nod there to the actual Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I really like that it's a form of Lecter using Buffalo Bill's technique of skinning his victims to use it for his own benefit to escape. And I think usually in the past, we've established that Lecter would eat his victims, not necessarily skin them. And so I think this is very much something where he's almost taking a nod from Buffalo Bill to skin the victim in order for him to have a disguise to escape. And then when he peels off the other guy's face and it's Lecter, it's such a chilling moment that I think just fits and adds to the gruesome nature of the way that he has to escape. The raid scene. This scene is one of the best edited in any film I can think of, and one of the reasons it's so compelling is solely through the use of editing choices. I think they could have shot this in any sequencing, but the way they ended up cutting it in sequence gives us such a misleading feel as a viewer. It makes us feel so confident in what we're seeing, and we're placing certain locations with the subtitles of the location to a specific interior. So what's amazing is we're usually used to marrying an establishing shot of a wide shot outside of, let's say, a house, and then when we cut inside, we naturally assume that it's the inside of the house we just saw, which just makes logical sense. But in this scene, they totally make use of the cinematic medium to its potential to show us that sometimes the editing is not reliable, and what we're seeing is this house outside. When we cut to the inside, we're actually in a different house, but there would be no way to know that, and we assume what we're seeing is exactly what's happening. And I love that this scene does such a great job of pulling the rug out from under you. When we ultimately reveal the house that we think the officers are in is completely different than the one they're in, and Clarice is actually right in the mouth of the lion's den for Buffalo Bill's lair, which makes it all the more terrifying when you realize what's actually happening. So I love that we start the wide shot of Calumet City, Illinois. It's the establishing shot of the sequence. We're outside a specific house, and here's the power of what one cut can do. So when we cut now to Buffalo Bill's hand and he has the larvae, for the moths, which is also symbolic in many ways for transformation, in the ways that even he's attempting to transform into a woman from a man. So I think it's such a powerful cut that we cut now to what's ostensibly that same house in Illinois. We're now starting to associate that Illinois house as being Buffalo Bill's house. It's his lair where he keeps his victims. So with one cut, we're led to believe this is absolutely Buffalo Bill's house. It has to be, right? Why else would we cut there? I also do want to highlight that Buffalo Bill, played by Ted Levine,
Hey, don't you hurt my dog! Don't you make me hurt your dog!
is so incredibly chilling as well. It's amazing to not only have one killer who's incredibly interesting, terrifying, unsettling, and Hannibal Lecter, but to have another killer that's almost the worst of the two, if you can believe it.
Hey, you don't know what pain is!
Who is incredibly disturbing and creepy in his own right, in that he's looking to transform himself, but he also has this creepy voice. He almost looks like more of a country boy, but there's clearly so much else going on that's disturbing inside him, and the propensity for violence, especially against women, the skinning of the victims, so he can fashion his own clothes almost with their sizes and with slabs of skin. It's such an interesting dichotomy of different things, and I think that's why Buffalo Bill, or James Gum, is so interesting as a character.
Oh, wait. Was she a great big fat person?
It's so many unsettling and surprising things that we just don't expect, and really take us off guard and make us feel even more disturbed whenever we see him on screen. And then again, we're cutting back, we're establishing a cutting pattern where we're starting to really believe that where the officers show up, they're starting to have officers show up outside this Illinois house. We're definitely led to believe that this is Buffalo Bill's place, and we're establishing tension by showing, oh, we're going back and forth. Buffalo Bill doesn't even know what's coming, and they're right outside about to get him. And what's also so fascinating is that Buffalo Bill is this killer who is sadistically killing and skinning his victims, and yet he loves this dog. He has this dog that he loves and is actually very kind to, as we see.
Precious. Darling heart, are you all right?
So it's such an interesting dichotomy of, usually you would think killers would be horrible to all forms of life, but he loves the moths. Clearly he has a love for them and a respect for them, and same with his dog. So that's why it's such an interesting mashup, makes for a very interesting and unexpected killer. I also really like that this last victim, I'm totally blanking on her name, but I love that she's taking agency as well, and she's not just gonna sit there and let herself get killed, but she has literally lured his dog down into the well.
Down here, you sack of shit!
Which is literally Buffalo Bill's lair. It's ultimately a perfect symbolism, perfect personification of a lair in any movie that I've ever seen, because it's low, it's beneath the ground, it's built into the house on these lower levels, cavernous in nature. So it's very much the belly of the beast, if you will. And the timing is absolutely impeccable, because right as Buffalo Bill grabs his gun, he's probably gonna go down there, potentially shoot the victim, just end it for her, get his dog back. The doorbell rings, and of course we think it's the guy who's a part of the police squad with the flowers. And I love that they do this twice, where when they show the doorbell ringing on the exterior side, we show the doorbell ringing on the interior side of Buffalo Bill's. Perfect timing, and one more misdirect just to really ensure that you think this is absolutely Buffalo Bill's place that we're about to go into. It's also perfect timing because what we come to find is it's actually Clarice who's ringing the doorbell of Buffalo Bill, and her timing literally allows her to save the woman's life who's downstairs, because when she rings it, he was about to go shoot her. So when she rings it, it forces Buffalo Bill to go answer the door so he can just make sure nothing else bad is going to happen to him up above.
Good afternoon. Sorry to bother you.
Amazing. Here's the full reveal, where instead of the officers coming in, it's Clarice who's walking in, that we didn't expect to be there. We didn't expect to see her. We almost forgot about her for a few moments. So this is such a brilliant use of editing. And when she does show up, there's no flashy crescendo. So we were waiting for such a big crescendo for the officers to go in and shoot Buffalo Bill. Instead, we're entering another slow, drawn out, painful dialogue scene where we're starting to ratchet up the tension. So it's this incredible way to play with your emotions, and Demme does such a good job of subverting expectations so many times in this film, which really puts this detective film above almost all of the other ones because of how often it subverts the standard expectations in the genre. Amazing. And then we have our crescendo moments of the officers coming in, rushing the other house, coming to the realization it's the wrong house.
There's no one here, Jack.
And only then is that when Jack Crawford realizes that Clarice is at Buffalo Bill's house all by herself.
Clarice.
And then right as Clarice sees the moth land on the spindles of yarn, which also are something that would be used for somebody who's a tailor or weaving clothes together, which she's come to learn. It's those two things almost simultaneously that reveal to her right away, this is Buffalo Bill's house. He is Buffalo Bill. But I love that she can't play her hand too soon because she's in immediate danger. She's all by herself in the house. She has to play it cool to try to see if she can extract herself. There's intense tension that has to play out in the next few moments because we know that she knows, and now we're just having to wait until we figure out what's the next move, because we've also established Buffalo Bill has a gun on his stove that's just right around the corner from where he's currently standing. So it's just a matter of time before somebody's gonna have to make a move in this deadly chess match.
Spread your legs. Put your hands in the back. Thumbs up. Freeze!
Descending into Buffalo Bill's lair. Okay, like we've always established, this is the finale climatic scene where she's gonna go take Buffalo Bill head on. Similar to Nancy in Nightmare on Elm Street, where she's gonna go confront Freddy. I think this is such an amazing choice where now she has become active. She's actively pursuing him. She's gonna take him down. She opens the door down to the cellar area. And again, she's about to start her symbolic descent into hell, into the mouth of the dragon, into the lair of the monster, which is Buffalo Bill. And so this fully again supports that idea of she has to descend downward to meet the dragon in its own lair in order to slay it. One thing that's also consistent with whenever we're following Starling is whenever she's exploring a new space, we also really get to know that space. So as she's going through and exploring Bill's lair in search of him, we're really getting to see the extent of what he has in the bottom of his house. What is his lair made up? We literally see, looks like real flesh on a mannequin. He's in the middle of doing some costumes, and he has his own headlines put up on a board, which in a way shows that he's aware of his notoriety and probably likes that and keeps him doing what he's doing, as a lot of serial killers do like that notoriety, and it's the thrill of trying to evade. Brooke Smith is the actress who plays Catherine Martin. Catherine Martin is the latest victim who's down in the tunnel with the dog.
Catherine.
And I love her performance right here. We only hear her voice as she's screaming, but you can hear the desperation where Clarice says,
I'm gonna get you out of there, but right now you listen to me. I've gotta leave this room. I'll be right back.
and you can hear the desperation where she believes she's going to get abandoned yet again.
No, don't you leave me here, you fucking bitch! No! Don't you leave me here!
And the quality of her scream is just incredible. I think she really absolutely crushed that performance.
Please! I gotta get out of here!
Where we can hear just how primal and animalistic this yell is of just hoping somebody will get her out no matter what it takes.
Wait! Don't go, please! Quiet!
One of the images that I love the most that just made me think of this statement is when she pushes into this new doorway, we see a small little candlelight on the wall and a moth flies up to it. As I just have this phrase in my mind, like moths to the flames. It's apropos for this that she's almost like the moth coming to the flame, coming to investigate. The curiosity factor is getting the better of her because she has to figure out where is he. So I think that's such a perfect statement. That visual totally just supports that in my opinion. Gotta have an amazing Dutch tilt here of the hallway. I think what showing us more of the lair does is two things for us. For one, it stays with our theme of establishing the space and it shows us more of what's down there, what is going on in this lair. But the second thing it does is prolong the tension and it really builds the suspense until we meet Bill again, because we don't know where he is. We just know Clarice is down there in the labyrinth. The other symbolism to this scene to me is that as she's exploring these different halls, she's going through doorways. It's It's this whole labyrinthine, it's like a maze down there under the house. This film very much does follow these classical structural myths and archetypes in a lot of legends. She's almost like Theseus going into the labyrinth to slay the Minotaur, which is Buffalo Bill. And so I also think that's apt, is that a buffalo is not too far off from like a Minotaur head. That's also probably a metaphor right there too. Maybe I'm making that up, but that's just what I think. This is amazing. I love that this is such an unexpected choice, since most of this movie we are following Clarice's point of view, and sometimes in movies where you're following the main character's POV, there's never a scene that they don't appear in, because in theory, if you're with the point of view of somebody, you can't ever leave that point of view. You're with them. We're following everything through their lens, through their eyes to the world. But I love that in this movie there's a few times we do deviate where Clarice isn't in the scene. When we first establish how Catherine Martin gets abducted by Buffalo Bill, Clarice shows up nowhere in that scene. And so I think it's really surprising but also inevitable that whenever we do deviate from Clarice's POV, it's still serving to tell the story. But again, it surprises us because we're always considering it through her perspective. What is she seeing? And then the moment we go to the lights getting shut off and now we're in the night vision goggles that Buffalo Bill has, we're now seeing it through his point of view, looking at Clarice in the dark. And so I really enjoyed that we're now flipping it on its head and saying, well, what is Bill seeing? And I think that's such a creepy but also fitting way to move us into the last finale of our movie. The other thing I like is that this is a very believable way of how a scene completely in darkness would appear. I really like that this is actually the most practical way that this scene would probably play out in the real world, is he would have the night vision goggles so he could see. She cannot see a dang thing down there. And instead of just trying to create artificial light that doesn't look like real darkness, because we can tell we're actually in real darkness, this is just the best way to actually see in that darkness as you would in the real world. What's crazy to me is how much time Bill has to actually grab and abduct Clarice. He's looking right at her and could totally grab her and doesn't. And that's an interesting choice to me. I have to believe it's beyond just suspension of disbelief. I think maybe there's a reason he's not grabbing her, abducting her. She also doesn't fit the body type of a lot of the other women he's abducting. So I think there's potentially something to that too. Finally, Clarice shoots Buffalo Bill, killing him, defeating the Minotaur for good. She's able to rescue Catherine and finally break the cycle. So in a way, I think it is starting to feed this idea that she has silenced the lambs. She has finally saved that lamb, Catherine being the metaphorical lamb for her in this situation. And there's something very interesting about this little American flag that we see as the light is finally shining through. She's shot through one of the drapes that opens. So I think there is potentially something you could be read into that too. I think for me, I see it as this is the America that has become of failing women and the way they're able to be abducted and how much they have to fear. I think that is something that you could potentially look at that. That could be a reach, but that's just one interpretation that I have. And then we have Clarice finally get awarded to be a full agent. She gets a phone call. Of course, it's Dr. Lecter. For so long, again, we have totally put our focus on Bill and catching Catherine Martin and saving her.
Don't forget your phone call.
And we haven't put any focus on where's Lecter, what's happened to him, where is he?
Starling.
Well, Clarice, have the lambs stopped screaming?
We find out he's actually somewhere overseas.
Where are you, Dr. Lecter?
I have no plans to call on you, Clarice. The world's more interesting with you in it.
And he literally says,
I'm having an old friend for dinner. Bye.
We see Chilton get off the plane. And in this way, I think we're actually supposed to be made to feel like Lecter is not completely a villain in full. He's actually taking down Chilton, who we've come to really dislike, who's trying to exploit Hannibal Lecter for his own fame and benefit. And now he's off in this other country, probably doing something else to capitalize off that. He's made multiple passes at Clarice. So this is someone we almost don't really mind if he were to actually take out of the equation. And we watch him walk along long. I really love that they play the credits out, the whole credits, as that same shot rolls of him walking and getting further into the distance, following after Chilton with the crowd, and we don't know what happens. I love that we play it out long enough that it's very possible he caught up to him, and we'll never know what happens there, but we can only guess. So I think it's a perfect way to end the film, and again, another way that usurps expectations, because a lot of times we would see the credits roll over black. So I think it's such a fitting, perfect way to end this movie, and still shows that they have mutual respect for each other, both Clarice and Lecter.
The world's more interesting with you in it. So you take care now to extend me the same courtesy.
And that's what's so interesting, surprising, and in some ways a bummer, because in the subsequent movies that come, like Hannibal or Red Dragon, we really never dive into the Clarice angle. We kind of focus more on Hannibal and his past and Chilton and what happens with that whole storyline. But unfortunately, we never really dive further into what becomes of Clarice after the Silence of the Lambs. So if you all know or have any hunches or want to comment below on what you think happens to Clarice after the end of this film, leave a comment below, because I'd love to hear what you think, and I'll check them out. And the other important question really to ask is that Clarice gets rewarded. She's lauded in her career. She is made an agent officially. She saves Catherine Martin. She takes down Buffalo Bill. But is that still enough? Did she truly silence the lambs, or are they still screaming metaphorically in her nightmares at the end of the night? Some of the main themes that make this film so impactful, in my opinion, are really the themes of misogyny in the workplace, especially when you look at Clarice's perspective and how strongly the film really identifies with her point of view as a woman navigating all of these difficult spaces, especially with these horrifically dangerous men who are killers and trapping women as victims. It says a lot about her transformation to take charge, chase him, take down the man who's killing all these women, because he literally wants their skins so that he can inhabit and become a woman himself in Buffalo Bill. And I think it also touches on these themes of transformation or metamorphosis. Obviously, the moths are such a major symbol to this film, and they're in the marketing, they're all over the film. Buffalo Bill puts them in the mouths of the victims, but there's obviously also the deeper metaphor of a transformation, a metamorphosis of a larva to become a full butterfly, and the stages within when that happens. And so I think there's very much the idea of what does transformation look like with gender, and Buffalo Bill very much wanting in himself to transform into a woman. He wants to be a woman. He wants to possess a woman and have her skin and know what that's like to walk in her skin, literally. So I think there's that deeper theme of how can one transform? What does metamorphosis look like, especially in the real world? And of course, there's the psychological elements of trauma and healing and psychotherapy or psychoanalysis that Lecter uses to great effect, actually, to help Clarice out. But also in some ways, I think helps her in a weird, twisted way overcome some of her trauma and come to heal from it, because in a way, their sessions almost feel like therapy sessions where Lecter is still playing the role of a therapist, which is what he does, and Clarice is his client. She's his patient, and they're just having these dialogues where he's helping her come to these realizations that she wouldn't come to on her own. So I think in this way, Lecter is likable in that way as a character, because he's so good at doing that, but he's doing that, but in this way to actually help her catch another killer. And he knows how to do that because he knows the minds of killers so well, because he is one himself. Is such an interesting component that really elevate this film on such a deeper, psychologically complex level that many other killer films and horror films would only aspire to. That concludes part 2 of how Silence of the Lambs created the most charismatic killer ever. I want to hear from you. Comment below your favorite scene from Silence of the Lambs or your favorite memories from the first time you watched it. Let me know if there's any other films you want me to cover in a future video, and I will definitely make sure we get them covered. And for more movie breakdowns, you can check out more of my videos like the series that I did on The Exorcist, which you can find here, so definitely check it out. So I will definitely see you then.